child was in turmoil. There were several loud arguments. When my father would come home drunk, he would be abusive towards my mother.
Every town has a shadow side, even the quiet ones. On a calm Sunday morning in suburban Nebraska, a father retraced the same route his son took every day to deliver newspapers. The bike was still there, the papers were untouched, but 13-year-old Danny Eberly was gone. At first, police walked the tidy streets and silent cul-de-sacs, thinking this was just a kid who wandered off. Nobody panicked yet. Nobody wanted to believe the worst. That illusion shattered 3 days later when Danny's body was discovered in a nearby field. That's when reality hit hard. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't random. A predator had been moving through the community, hiding in plain sight. And what no one knew at the time was even more disturbing. Danny wasn't the first, and he wouldn't be the last. Hey guys, it's Andrew, and welcome to Everytown. Today we're digging into a case that still chills people to the bone. This is the story of a serial killer most people have never heard of. Someone whose obsession wasn't just the outcome, but the act itself. He started as a Boy Scout, later became an Air Force technician, and somehow lived a double life he couldn't control. This is the Boy Scout killer. The man behind the crimes was John Joubert IV, sometimes called Triple J. He was born on July 2, 1963, in Lawrence, Massachusetts, and on the surface, his childhood looked typical. Catholic upbringing, church every weekend, parochial school, and a working mother doing her best to hold things together. But even early on, something felt off. People noticed a cold distance in his eyes, like he was never fully present. When John was just 4 years old, he witnessed his father choking his mother until she passed out. Years later, he told therapists that moment never left him, saying, "My family life as a child was in turmoil. There were several loud arguments. My father would come home drunk and be abusive toward my mother." By age 6, around the time his parents divorced, his thoughts turned darker. He admitted having violent fantasies, including thoughts of strangling his babysitter, because that seed had already been planted. He admitted later that his thoughts didn't stop at violence. He wanted to watch her die, and he even fixated on disturbing ideas about what would happen afterward. What makes this truly unsettling isn't just how dark those thoughts were, but how they affected him emotionally. According to professionals who evaluated John years later, these fantasies didn't agitate him. They calmed him. They gave him a strange sense of peace. That detail only came out after everything had already gone wrong. But in real time, nobody around him noticed anything alarming. John, or JJ as people called him, flew completely under the radar. The adults in his life were wrapped up in their own chaos. His parents' divorce turned ugly fast, and custody became a non-stop power struggle. His father wanted access to him, while his mother refused any contact at all. Eventually, she packed up John and his younger sister and moved them to Portland, Maine. They ended up crammed into a rundown apartment where tension hung heavy, especially during the brutal winters. His mother was strict, controlling, and impossible to satisfy. Richard Petrie, who later became John's high school band teacher and one of the few adults who tried to guide him, said she kept him on an extremely tight leash. Nothing John did was ever good enough. In that kind of pressure cooker, whatever cracks already existed inside him only grew deeper. School offered no escape. John was small for his age, painfully quiet, and an easy target. The bullies locked in immediately. Bigger kids shoved him in the halls, mocked him at recess, and twisted his last name into jokes. They called him Juju B, like the candy, and John never pushed back, not once. His teacher, Francesca Bergen, noticed this and later said most kids at least try to defend themselves. John didn't. He just absorbed it every single day, the same way he did at home, and she quietly wondered if, deep down, he thought he deserved it. What nobody realized was that John wasn't brushing any of this off. Every insult, every shove, every moment of fear stuck with him. He just buried it deep. All that humiliation and anger didn't disappear. It fermented, twisting into something darker as time went on. By the time he was 11 or 12, his thoughts weren't just chaotic flashes anymore. They became controlled, planned, intentional. He later admitted he imagined restraining people, silencing them, and watching their panic unfold. It wasn't random rage. It was about control. Psychiatric reports would confirm this years later. He said it wasn't physical harm that drew him in. It was the fear, the begging, that moment when someone realized there was no escape.
They picked on, but they seemed to defend themselves, and I think because John did not defend himself, I don't know, sometimes I wonder if he thought he deserved that kind of abuse that he would get. The shoving, the names, the teasing.
And while all of this was brewing inside him, John worked overtime to look completely normal on the outside. He joined the Boy Scouts. He played clarinet in the school and marching band. At just 12 years old, he picked up a paper route and kept it for 5 years straight. He used that money, along with summer jobs, to help cover tuition at Cheverus High School, an all-boys Catholic school in Portland. Academically, he thrived. Honors classes, solid grades, no red flags. To most people, he was just a quiet, bookish kid who stayed out of trouble. He spent his afternoons alone in his room, building model airplanes and listening to music. No dating, no partying, no close friends. That isolation meant there was nobody around to notice what was spiraling in his head. By December of 1979, when John was 16 years old, the line between imagination and action finally cracked. That winter, a 6-year-old girl named Sarah Canty was playing outside her home in Portland's Oakdale neighborhood. When she bent down to pick up a football, a teenager on a green 10-speed bike rode past and jabbed her with a pencil before speeding off. The incident caused a small injury, enough to scare her badly. Her parents immediately called police, who canvassed the area but came up empty. No clear suspect, no solid description. It looked like a strange, senseless, one-time incident. But for John, it wasn't random at all. When the girl cried out, he felt something new, a rush that shocked him to his core, a thrill he couldn't ignore. And once he felt it, he knew he wanted to feel it again. 6 weeks later, in January of 1980, the situation escalated fast. Vicky Goff was walking to an evening class at the University of Southern Maine. The sidewalks were cold, quiet, and mostly empty. A young man passed her going the opposite direction, and she greeted him politely. Just a quick hello, nothing more. Seconds later, everything changed. Someone rushed her from behind, clamped a hand over her mouth, and stabbed her in the side with a knife. At first, Vicky thought she'd been punched. Then she looked down and saw the blood spreading. The blade had gone in deep. Somehow, she stayed on her feet, turned around, and shouted, almost instinctively, "Why did you do that?" The attacker didn't answer. He just took off running. Vicky spent a full week in the hospital recovering. The physical wounds healed, but the fear didn't. 4 months later, she and her husband packed up and left Portland entirely. At the time, police didn't connect this attack to anything else. They didn't realize a pattern was forming, and if they had, what came next might have been prevented. 2 months later, in March of 1980, a 9-year-old boy named Michael Witham was walking along Danforth Avenue when a teenager called out to him. The question sounded harmless: where he was going, who he lived with. But the moment Michael turned his head away, the teenager lashed out with a small blade, causing a serious injury to his neck before fleeing. The wound wasn't fatal. Michael managed to run home, bleeding badly, and survived after receiving 12 stitches. By then, fear had gripped the entire Oakdale neighborhood. Parents warned their kids constantly. Schools sent notices home. People watched strangers closely and checked over their shoulders everywhere they went. And then, just as suddenly as the attacks began, they stopped. The boy on the bike disappeared completely. Inside the already fractured Burt household, John quietly finished high school in 1981. He followed the plan he'd talked about for years and enrolled at Norwich University in Vermont to study engineering. But that chapter wouldn't last long at all. College gave John a kind of freedom he'd never experienced before, and he had no idea how to handle it. Without rules or supervision, things unraveled fast. Classes and studying were replaced by partying and bad habits. The structure he needed vanished and his grades collapsed. He earned just 10 credits before giving up entirely and dropping out.
Pulled out the knife. He said, "Lord, please don't kill me." Where I'd done that, he told me that if I would take him to the hospital, he wouldn't say anything. I didn't believe him, so then...
By the summer of 1982, he was back in Maine, unemployed, drifting, and completely directionless. Looking for order, he enlisted in the Air Force and trained as a radar technician. It gave him structure, discipline, and a sense of purpose, at least on the surface. But before he ever left Maine, he crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. On the evening of August 22, 1982, 11-year-old Ricky Stetson told his parents he was going out for a jog around Back Cove, a familiar loop in Portland he knew well. Ricky was a red-haired, freckle-faced kid who loved sports, being outdoors, and spending time with friends. Just a regular, energetic kid doing something ordinary, and that's what makes what happened next so devastating. Ricky never came home. The next morning, a woman driving across Tukey's Bridge noticed a body in the grass below. It was Ricky. Investigators determined he had been attacked and killed, and evidence showed someone had attempted to interfere with his clothing. They also found bite marks on his leg, a detail that would haunt the case for years. Police arrested a 24-year-old man named Joseph Anderson, but dental impressions didn't match the bite marks. After a year and a half with no solid evidence, he was released. With no viable suspects left, the case went cold. By then, John was long gone, moving upward in the Air Force. By the end of 1982, he was stationed at Offutt Air Force Base in Bellevue, Nebraska. FBI profiler Robert Ressler later said he believed John joined the military to put as much distance as possible between himself and Maine. Distance meant safety. Distance meant time. Bellevue was a quiet suburban town just south of Omaha. And on September 18, 1983, 13-year-old Danny Eberly was riding his bike along his paper route, the same kind of route John himself once rode as a kid, unaware that his path was about to cross with something far darker. Danny took real pride in his paper route, especially the bike he rode every single morning. That bike mattered to him. By mid-morning, complaints started coming in from neighbors who hadn't received their Sunday paper. Something wasn't right. Danny's father, Leonard, got into his car and drove the route himself, retracing every stop his son made like clockwork. That's when he saw it. Danny's bike was propped neatly against a fence near the fourth house. The basket was still full, all 67 newspapers untouched. Leonard knew instantly something was wrong. Danny would never abandon his bike. He would never skip his route. That bike and that job meant everything to him. And in that moment, Leonard understood the unthinkable. His son was gone. What he didn't know was that John Burt had been setting his alarm for 6:30 every morning for weeks. He'd wake up, lie there quietly, and decide whether he would go out looking for someone to harm. Most mornings he shut the alarm off and went back to sleep. But on September 18th, he got up and he went looking.
Very scary. I'm, very concerned. So nothing happens, to my children.
Police urge children to travel in groups. Many parents wouldn't let their kids out of their sight.
He spotted Danny at the start of his route. He approached, threatened him with a knife, and forced him to stay silent. Faced with fear and danger, Danny had no real choice but to comply. John led him to a car and drove him to a remote area outside town, far from anyone who could help. 3 days later, searchers found Danny's body hidden in tall grass along a gravel road, roughly 4 miles from where his bike had been left. Evidence showed he had been restrained using rope and tape, and investigators determined he had been attacked multiple times. Some injuries suggested the attacker wasn't rushing, making the scene even more disturbing. The medical examiner concluded Danny remained aware for several agonizing minutes before passing, and then came the detail that tied this case to others. Investigators found clear bite marks. This was one of the murders John later confessed to in full. He told detectives that at one point the gag slipped, and Danny asked him, "Am I going to die?" That moment haunted everyone who heard it, because it showed just how calculated and cold this crime truly was. John later admitted he looked Danny straight in the eyes and answered honestly, "Yes." That's when Danny tried to roll away, desperate to escape. John stopped him by striking again, pinning him down. Danny pleaded, promising he wouldn't tell anyone, begging to be taken to the hospital. John said he actually hesitated for a moment, weighing the choice, but then he convinced himself Danny would identify him, and that thought ended any doubt. He continued until the boy stopped moving. All of that came out much later. At the time, investigators were staring at 2 murdered boys in different parts of the country, and one of the cases clearly involved an abduction. That detail triggered federal involvement. FBI profiler Robert Ressler was brought in and began breaking everything down: the bindings, the tape, the injury patterns, and the bite marks. From that evidence, he built a chilling profile. The suspect would be a young white male, single, intelligent, socially isolated, and likely struggling internally, someone living or working near Bellevue, and most importantly, someone who would strike again. Every single detail turned out to be accurate. Then came December 2nd, 1983. 12-year-old Christopher Walden left his home in Papillion, Nebraska, about 3 miles from where Danny had been found. He started his walk to school like any other morning and never arrived. Witnesses later reported seeing a white man in a tan car in the area that day. 2 days later, hunters discovered Christopher's body in a wooded area roughly 5 miles outside town.
He was struggling. Looked like he was in pain. I didn't see it suffering too much, so I took on his hand. Stabbed.
Investigators determined he had been attacked repeatedly. Like Danny, there were multiple injuries. His clothing had been disturbed as well, but unlike the previous case, there were no bindings. The evidence suggested this attack happened quickly, almost rushed. Once again, several of the injuries were shallow, and once again it showed the same pattern. This wasn't about speed or necessity. It was about control, fear, and the moment itself. The goal was never quick harm. John later admitted it was about causing fear and watching it unfold. He confessed that he pulled up beside Christopher as the boy was walking, deliberately flashing the sheath of his knife as a silent threat. Christopher got into the car out of fear. John then drove him to a secluded area near railroad tracks outside town and ordered him to remove his clothes, and Christopher complied, terrified. But when John told him to lie down in the snow, Christopher refused. That's when everything spiraled. A struggle broke out. John tried to overpower him and began choking him, but the freezing air numbed his hands. Frustrated, he switched tactics and used the knife instead. It was chaotic, cold, desperate, and over in moments. At the time, investigators still didn't know exactly how these encounters unfolded. And by the time this third victim was discovered, law enforcement had to face a harsh truth. Despite all the patrols, warnings, and profiling, they still had nothing solid. No suspect, no arrest, no real lead. That all changed on January 11th, 1984, because John finally made a mistake. It started with a preschool teacher in Bellevue who noticed something unsettling. A man sat in a car near the school, watching, not moving, just staring. Something felt off. Trusting her instincts, she walked over and quietly wrote down his license plate number. Before she could finish, the man jumped out, shoved her, and threatened her life. She managed to break free and immediately called police. When officers ran the plate, they learned the car was a rental, signed out to a 20-year-old Air Force radar technician named John Joubert. Investigators searched his room on base and found a length of rope. The moment the FBI saw it, alarms went off. They recognized it instantly. It was the same rare rope used to restrain Danny Eberly. This specific type was manufactured in South Korea exclusively for the U.S. military, not something civilians could easily access. Under questioning, John admitted he'd obtained it from a former scout leader with military ties and kept it. Investigators also found a hunting knife in his car, and through it all, John remained eerily calm, far too calm for a man facing questions like these. What stunned investigators most was how calm he was. Almost relieved, John confessed to both Nebraska murders without hesitation. When detectives asked him point blank if he would kill again if he walked out of that room, he didn't dodge the question. He said yes. He even admitted he was glad he'd been caught, saying he didn't believe he could stop himself otherwise.
I would never kill anyone again, if that's what you mean by reformed. Yes, I know that I could never harm a hand.
Once John was in custody, the FBI began lining up his crimes with unsolved cases across the country. Robert Ressler and a team from Maine immediately noticed chilling similarities to the unsolved murder of Ricky Stetson in Portland. Investigators took John's dental impressions and hair samples, and the results were undeniable. The bite mark found on Ricky's leg was a perfect match. By January of 1986, John was formally indicted for Ricky's murder. As investigators dug deeper, they connected him to the earliest attacks in Portland: Sarah Canty, Michael Witham, Vicky Goff, and multiple other attempted assaults. The pattern was impossible to ignore. In Nebraska, John was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. He initially pleaded not guilty, then changed his plea to guilty. A panel of psychiatrists evaluated him and diagnosed obsessive-compulsive disorder, sadistic tendencies, and schizoid personality disorder. Still, every expert agreed on one thing. He fully understood what he was doing when he committed those crimes. A 3-judge panel sentenced him to death for the Nebraska murders. In Maine, where capital punishment doesn't exist, he received life in prison for Ricky Stetson's murder. John spent more than a decade on death row at the Nebraska State Penitentiary. During that time, he read Freud and Hemingway, lifted weights, and taught himself to draw. Those drawings were disturbing, violent scenes involving young boys. Years later, journalist Mark Pettit obtained copies and showed them to criminal profilers. Every single one reached the same conclusion. John's fantasies hadn't faded with time. They'd grown sharper, darker, more refined. If he ever walked free, they said it was almost certain he would kill again, and that reality lingered right up until his execution. John insisted he had changed. He claimed that while sitting in prison, he finally asked his mother and sister if anything traumatic had happened during his childhood. That's when his mother admitted, for the first time, that his father had once choked her unconscious while John was present. John latched onto that moment, saying it explained everything. He claimed that now that he understood it, he would never harm anyone again. Almost no one believed him. And so, on July 17, 1996, at 12:01 a.m., John was led into the execution chamber in Nebraska. He was 33 years old. At 12:29 a.m., he was pronounced dead. His story ended there, but the damage he caused didn't. Years earlier, John told a reporter from the Omaha World-Herald that what affected him most wasn't the act itself. It was the sense of power and control. He said it was the moment when fear set in, when someone realized there was no escape. That was the feeling he chased. In the end, the only reason he didn't continue was because one person refused to ignore a bad feeling. A preschool teacher noticed something off. She trusted her instincts. She wrote down a license plate number instead of looking away. No badge, no task force, no high-tech profiling, just awareness. And that single decision changed everything. Sometimes that's all it takes, one person paying attention, one moment of courage, the thin line between another tragedy and the moment a killer's world finally collapses. That's going to do it for this episode of Everytown. If this story kept you locked in, make sure to like, subscribe, and share. It really helps the channel grow. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one, where we dive into another chilling story that proves no place is ever as safe as it seems.